Alicia's lips quivered as she tried to respond, but words seemed too fragile for the weight of what Eleanor had just promised. For so long, she had carried the burden of raising her son alone, working endless shifts, scraping together coins to pay rent, often skipping her own meals just so Michael wouldn't go to bed hungry. She had never asked for pity, never sought out charity, and certainly never imagined that the mother of the very man who once gave her hope would one day stand before her offering not just support but family. Her knees gave way beneath her, and she sank onto the damp grass, clutching Michael tightly to her chest. Eleanor knelt beside her without hesitation, ignoring the chill of the earth and the elegance of her designer clothes, because in that moment none of it mattered. What mattered was the invisible thread her son had woven between them years ago, now pulling them together in this place of grief and rebirth. The silence stretched as only the wind moved through the cemetery trees, carrying with it the scent of damp soil and freshly cut flowers. Finally, Eleanor spoke again, softer this time, her voice breaking like fragile glass. For years I thought I was cursed to live out my life with nothing but empty mansions and hollow echoes of laughter that died when my son did. I thought money could numb the pain, but every night I sat awake, staring at the walls, realizing that wealth means nothing when the people you love are gone. And yet, today, I realize he didn't truly leave me. He left me you. Both of you. Alicia looked up, her eyes wide, her heart pounding at the rawness of Eleanor's confession. Michael, still too young to fully understand, simply placed his small hand over Eleanor's, a gesture so pure it sent shivers down her spine. It was as though the child was saying, "Don't worry, I'll be your family too." The billionaire felt her soul crack open, but not in despair. This time it was in hope, the kind of hope she hadn't tasted in years. She thought of all the nights she had prayed at this grave for a sign, something, anything, to remind her that her son's life had not been in vain. And now, here it was, a waitress with eyes full of gratitude and a boy with his father's name who looked at her as though she belonged in his world. Eleanor made another silent vow to herself right then and there. She would make sure Michael had every opportunity her son never got to finish chasing. She would lift Alicia from the weight of her struggles, and she would honor her son not by mourning him forever but by living out the love he had left behind. Eleanor could barely breathe as she tried to process the flood of emotions coursing through her. For years, she had lived with the aching thought that her son's life had been cut short, leaving behind nothing but memories and sorrow. Yet here, in front of her, stood undeniable proof that his kindness had planted seeds that grew in places she never imagined. She looked at Alicia, whose trembling hands betrayed both her pain and her pride, and then at the little boy who clung to her side as if he sensed that this meeting meant something far greater than any of them could explain. Eleanor wiped her eyes quickly, trying to compose herself, though her voice cracked as she finally asked, "Why didn't you ever tell me this before? Why didn't you reach out?" Alicia gave a weary smile, one lined with humility. "Because women like me don't usually cross paths with women like you. I was just a waitress, a single mother trying to survive. I didn't think anyone would care about my story, let alone you, a billionaire who's lived a life so far from mine. But I couldn't stay away today. Something inside me told me I had to bring Michael here, to the man he was named after. I wanted him to know where his name came from, to see the resting place of the person who unknowingly saved both of us." Eleanor's heart clenched, her tears threatening again, but this time they weren't only tears of grief, they were tears of a fragile, unexpected joy. She reached out and gently touched little Michael's cheek. "You are a reminder that my son's life had meaning beyond what I could see. He lives through you now, through your strength, through your mother's courage." The boy smiled shyly, then, with the innocent honesty only children have, asked, "Does that mean you're my grandma too?" The question hit Eleanor like a wave. She covered her mouth, gasping, and then pulled the boy into her arms without hesitation. The warmth of his small body against hers felt like a piece of her broken heart stitching itself back together. Alicia's tears streamed freely as she watched the moment, torn between gratitude and disbelief. Eleanor turned to her with determination blazing in her eyes, the kind that made it clear she was about to change everything. "Alicia," she said firmly, "you are not alone anymore. From this day forward, you and Michael are part of my life. My son gave you hope once, and now it's my turn to honor him by making sure both of you never have to face this world alone again." The promise hung in the air like a vow carved into stone, unshakable and eternal. The young woman drew in a shaky breath, her fingers tightening around her child's hand as though the little boy was her anchor. "My name is Alicia," she said softly, eyes darting between Eleanor and the gravestone as though searching for permission to speak the words that had been locked away for years. "I used to work at a small diner, not far from the university where your son studied. Back then, I was just a waitress, barely scraping by, trying to keep a roof over my head and save enough to give my future child," she paused, glancing at Michael, "a better life someday. I didn't know many kind people in those days. Customers came and went, most of them too busy to notice me. But your son, he noticed." Eleanor's breath trembled as she leaned forward, listening with her entire soul. Alicia's voice carried a mix of sorrow and gratitude. "There was a night when everything had gone wrong. My rent was overdue, the diner's manager had yelled at me in front of customers, and I was ready to give up. I remember standing outside behind the diner, crying, thinking of walking away and never coming back. That's when he appeared. I didn't even know his name at the time. He just came up and asked me if I was all right. I tried to brush it off, embarrassed that someone like him, clean clothes, soft eyes, that kind of warmth, would even care. But he didn't leave. He stayed. He told me something I'll never forget: you're stronger than you think. The world will try to break you, but don't let it. Your story isn't over yet." Alicia's eyes shimmered with fresh tears. "I thought it was just words, but they carried me through nights when I had nothing else. I kept working, I kept trying, and even when I found out I was pregnant, I didn't give up. I named my son Michael because I wanted him to carry a piece of the man who saved me from giving up that night." Eleanor's chest tightened, and she reached for the gravestone, tracing her son's name with trembling fingers. Her son, her beloved Michael, had been the kind of person who left ripples in lives without even knowing it. And here was proof, standing in front of her, this woman and her child who existed in part because of his compassion. The little boy, oblivious to the gravity of the moment, leaned against the grave and whispered, "Thank you, Uncle Michael." Eleanor's eyes flooded with tears she could no longer hold back. It felt as though her son had reached through the veil of death to remind her that his legacy wasn't buried in the ground, it was alive in the lives he had touched, in the tears of this waitress, and in the hopeful eyes of a child who bore his name. Eleanor's heels clicked softly against the gravel path as she approached, but the young woman didn't notice her at first. The child, however, did, his wide brown eyes lifted, and for a moment, their gazes locked. There was something striking about the way he looked at her, almost as if he had seen her before, almost as if he already knew who she was. Eleanor felt her throat tighten, because she had never seen this boy in her life, and yet there was something hauntingly familiar in the way his small fingers curled around his mother's hand. When she finally reached close enough, the young woman quickly wiped her tears, embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable state, and whispered an apology. I didn't mean to intrude. I know this is your son's resting place. Her voice cracked, and she clutched her chest as if holding back a flood of memories too painful to release. Eleanor, instead of reacting with the cold authority most would expect from a billionaire, felt her heart soften. She bent slightly, trying to see the boy's face more clearly. He couldn't have been more than 6 years old, yet there was a quiet strength about him, the kind of presence that usually doesn't appear in children so young. She crouched down and asked gently, "Sweetheart, what's your name?" The boy hesitated before answering, "Michael." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. Michael. That was her son's name, the very name she whispered every night into her pillow before sleep finally stole her away. Her pulse raced, her eyes stung, and for a moment she wondered if the universe was playing a cruel trick on her. The waitress, noticing Eleanor's trembling hands, hurried to explain. "I named him after someone I once knew, someone who changed my life, even though he never realized it." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. This woman, this waitress, judging by her plain uniform, wasn't just crying because of loss. She was crying because she carried a hidden story, one tied to Eleanor's late son in a way she hadn't expected. 100 questions swirled in Eleanor's mind, but instead of overwhelming the woman, she whispered, "Tell me. Please." The young woman glanced around nervously, as though afraid of being judged for daring to speak so openly to someone like Eleanor. Then, with a voice barely above a whisper, she began. As they arrive at the sprawling mansion, the billionaire's staff bustle around, unsure of how to handle this unexpected guest and the child who now holds a piece of their late master's legacy. Aisha and Jamal are ushered into a lavish living room, where the billionaire offers them tea, her hands trembling slightly as she pours. The conversation flows haltingly at first, with Aisha sharing how she struggled to make ends meet after her son's death, working double shifts to provide for Jamal while carrying the weight of her grief. The billionaire, moved by Aisha's resilience, begins to see her not as a stranger but as a kindred spirit, someone who loved her son as deeply as she did. She pulls out old photo albums, showing Jamal pictures of his father, his first steps, his graduation, the sketches that lined his walls, and the child's face lights up with wonder. But the billionaire's shock deepens when Aisha reveals a letter her son had written, intended for his mother, confessing his love for Aisha and his plans to introduce her to the family. The letter, yellowed and tear-stained, speaks of his fear of rejection and his hope for acceptance, a hope that died with him. The billionaire's tears fall freely now, a mix of regret for not knowing and pride in the man her son had become. She vows to make things right, offering Aisha a job at her company and a home for her in Jamal, a gesture born not of pity but of a desperate need to honor her son's memory. The room fills with a tentative warmth as Jamal climbs onto the billionaire's lap, and for the first time in years, she feels a flicker of the happiness she thought she'd lost forever.